He slid the divorce papers across the marble table, like he was tipping a waitress he didn't respect. Lucian Moretti didn't look up, didn't flinch, just leaned back in the chair at the head of his boardroom in front of his executives and smiled the way men smile when they've already decided how the story ends. "Sign it," he said, "and do us both a favor." Nia Caldwell, 12 years his wife, mother of his child, the woman who had held her silence through things that would have broken most people, picked up the pen. She signed, and then she didn't move, because Nia Caldwell hadn't walked into that room to lose. She had walked in to collect. Before we go any further, if you've ever loved someone who made you feel like you were lucky to be chosen by them, this story is going to hit different. Stay with us until the end. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one, because we post every week, and the next one is already waiting for you. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The rain had been falling for 3 hours by the time Nia pulled into the parking structure beneath the Moretti Group's downtown tower. She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing she thought about later, not what she saw, not what was said, but the strange, almost laughable fact that she had only come because Sophia had left her favorite stuffed rabbit in Lucian's office 2 days earlier. A small brown rabbit with one eye missing and a ribbon around its neck that Sophia had named Mr. Penny for reasons nobody in the family could explain. Sophia was 6. She hadn't slept properly in 2 nights without it. And Lucian, who had been too busy to bring it home, had apparently also been too busy to answer a single one of Nia's texts about it. So Nia had come herself, 9:15 on a Thursday night. Still in the blazer she'd worn to her afternoon meeting with a nonprofit board, she volunteered for the one piece of professional identity she had managed to hold on to after Lucian had, gradually, quietly, over the course of many years, made it very clear that her career was an inconvenience to his. She remembered, thinking, as the elevator rose toward the 43rd floor, that she should have eaten dinner. She'd made Sophia's plate, supervised bath time, read 2 chapters of a book she barely absorbed, and then sat at the kitchen island with a glass of water, and realized she had forgotten herself again, the way she often did, the way she had learned to. The 43rd floor was quiet when the elevator opened. The main lights were dimmed for the evening. Most of the staff would have left hours ago. Nia knew the layout. She'd attended enough company events here to navigate it without thinking. Lucian's private office was at the far end of the hall, past the conference rooms, past the wall of glass that overlooked the city's wet and glittering skyline. She walked without hurrying. Her heels were quiet on the carpeted floor. She carried the small key card Lucian had given her years ago for emergencies. She couldn't remember the last time she'd used it. Couldn't remember the last time she'd felt like she had any right to enter a space her husband occupied. That thought alone should have told her something. A wife who feels like a guest in her husband's world. The door to Lucian's office was not closed. It was not wide open, either. It sat at maybe a 40-degree angle, the way doors do when someone stepped out briefly, and is expected to return, or when 2 people were too distracted to remember the door existed at all. Nia stopped. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly what made her stop before she could see anything. Some shift in the air, some sound that wasn't quite speech and wasn't quite silence. Something that sat wrong in the base of her stomach before her mind had any words for it. She stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. It was probably 4 seconds. Then she pushed the door open the rest of the way. Lucian had his back to her, which was the first thing she registered. He was standing near the window, not at his desk, not on a call, but near the window, and his right hand was on Bianca Vale's face. Not her shoulder, not her arm, her face. His thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, the way you touch someone you've touched 1,000 times before and intend to touch 1,000 times again. Bianca was Lucian's executive assistant. She had been for 4 years. She was 31, Italian-American, and possessed of exactly the kind of effortless glamour that made other women feel slightly less real in the same room. Nia had asked about her exactly once, 18 months ago, and Lucian had looked at her with genuine irritation, not guilt, not discomfort, just irritation, and said, "Don't embarrass yourself." Nia had not asked again. Now she was standing in the doorway, watching her husband hold another woman's face. It's like it was something precious. Bianca saw her first. Her eyes went wide, and she pulled back, and that small movement made Lucian turn. For just a moment, less than a second, barely even a flicker, something crossed his face. It might have been surprise. It might have been the beginning of something like guilt. But Lucian Moretti had spent 20 years building and protecting an empire that operated in the shadow of the law, and men like that did not let their faces tell the truth for long. The expression disappeared. What replaced it was worse. It was calm, settled, almost bored. Nia. He said her name the way you say the name of someone who's knocked on the wrong door. She didn't look at Bianca. She couldn't. If she looked at Bianca, she would have to make Bianca real, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. Kept her eyes on Lucian, on his face, on the hand that was now hanging loosely at his side, as if it hadn't just been cradling another woman's face 45 seconds ago. How long, Nia said. Not a question, exactly. The words came out flat and low, the way your voice goes when your body is trying very hard to stay in control of itself. Lucian reached for his jacket, which was hanging on the chair near his desk. He picked it up and slipped it on with the unhurried ease of a man with nowhere to be and nothing to explain. Bianca, he said, give us a minute. Bianca gathered herself and left. She didn't look at Nia. Nia didn't blame her for that. Or maybe she did, somewhere deep and hot, that she wasn't examining right now. The door clicked shut behind her. Lucian stood in the middle of his massive mahogany and glass office and looked at his wife. He had 30 pounds and 4 inches on her. He had a name that made people in this city step back when they heard it. He had walked into rooms all his life and had them rearrange themselves around him. He was not a man who had ever been made to feel small by anyone. He said, "She's not just my assistant." Nia heard the words. She processed them. She felt them pass through her like cold water. How long? She said again. Same flatness. Some quiet. Lucian exhaled through his nose, a small sound of impatience. Does it matter? It matters to me. He looked at her for a moment. Really looked at her, and what she saw in his expression wasn't cruelty exactly. Cruelty would have required him to care enough to want her to hurt. What she saw was something more clinical, more final. An assessment. About 2 years, he said. 2 years. Sophia had been 4 when it started. Nia had been in the middle of turning down a department director position, the best professional opportunity of her adult life, because Lucian had told her the timing wasn't right, that Sophia needed stability, that a wife of his shouldn't need to chase a career. She had sat at that same kitchen island, where she'd forgotten dinner tonight, and she had called the hiring committee and declined the offer, and she had told herself it was the right thing. The loving thing, the thing a good wife did. That same month, apparently, her husband had been 2 years into a different kind of arrangement entirely. She stood very still. Lucian must have taken her stillness for shock, processing, or the early stages of pleading. Because his shoulders loosened slightly, and he moved toward his desk and sat on the edge of it, and he said, in a voice that she recognized as the one he used when he was explaining something obvious to someone slow, "You knew what this marriage was, Nia. I have never pretended to be something I'm not. You pretended to be faithful," she said. "I provided everything you needed. I needed a husband. You needed stability, security, a name that opened doors, all of which you have." He tilted his head. "Don't turn this into something small." There was a sound that came out of Nia then, not a laugh, not a cry. Something in between that she would be embarrassed about for a long time afterward, an involuntary broken exhale that she pressed her hand over her mouth to stop. "Something small," she repeated. "You're not going to throw away 12 years over." Over what? Over the truth? She lowered her hand. Her voice had found steadiness again, which surprised her. "You think I don't have the right to know what's true?" Lucian stood up from the desk. He was using his full height now, the way he did in board meetings when he wanted to remind the room who held authority. "What you have the right to," he said slowly, "is exactly what I decide to give you. That's what you agreed to. That's what this has always been." Nia Caldwell looked at her husband, at the man she had followed, defended, rearranged herself for, and slowly, invisibly, reconstructed her entire identity around. She looked at him standing in his glass tower, above a city he treated like territory, and she understood, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrives in the worst moments of your life, that he had never seen her as a partner. He had seen her as a possession that happened to come with a wedding ring. She reached up and took the ring off. She set it on the corner of his desk. Not thrown, not slid, simply placed, quietly, with both hands. Then I want a divorce, she said. Lucian went still. Not the calculated stillness he was so practiced at. A different kind. A genuine involuntary pause. The kind of stillness that comes when your brain is trying to catch up with something your confidence told you couldn't happen. You want to be careful, he said, his voice had dropped. You don't have any idea what life looks like without my name protecting you. Then I'll find out. Your daughter. Don't. The word came out like a door shutting. Don't put Sophia in this. Don't you dare. He looked at her for another long moment. Then something shifted in him, a kind of settling, as if he had just run a rapid calculation and arrived at an answer he was satisfied with. That's what you want. He almost smiled. That almost smile was the thing that stayed with Nia on the elevator ride down in the parking structure and through every mile of the drive home in the rain. Not the confession, not the image of his hand on another woman's face. The almost smile. He was not afraid. He was not sorry. He was already planning. Nia had not been naive when she married Lucian Moretti. She wanted to be honest about that, at least to herself, even 12 years after the fact. She had known he was powerful in ways that didn't fully show in daylight. She had known his family had roots in things that respectable people didn't ask questions about. She had been 26, finishing a master's in business management, and she had been dazzled, she would admit that now, though it cost her something to say it by a man who moved through the world as if it owed him passage. Her mother, Celestine Caldwell, had seen it coming. That man has never been told no by anything he wanted. Celestine had told her, 2 months before the wedding. They were in Celestine's kitchen, shelling peas the way they'd done, since Nia was a child, and Celestine's hands had not stopped moving, the whole time she spoke. Men like that don't fall in love, they acquire. Nia had been angry. She had told her mother she was being unfair, that she didn't know Lucian the way Nia did. That love looked different on different people. Celestine had nodded and kept shelling her peas. I hope I'm wrong, baby, she'd said. I've been wrong before. She hadn't been wrong. But Celestine had also not told Nia everything she knew about Lucian Moretti. That part would come later. The first 3 weeks after Nia set her ring on that desk were the hardest she'd experienced since her mother's funeral. She was running on disrupted sleep and the specific, exhausting discipline of not falling apart in front of a 6-year-old who noticed everything. Sophia knew something was wrong. The way children always know, not through words, but through the change in the frequency of a house. She started bringing Mr. Penny to breakfast, a habit she'd recently grown out of. She asked, 3 different times, in 3 different ways, whether Daddy was coming for dinner. Each time, Nia gave an answer that was technically true. Each time, Sophia accepted it with the careful trust of a child who isn't ready not to trust her mother. Lucian's attorneys moved faster than Nia had expected. The settlement offer arrived 11 days after that night. She sat with it at the kitchen table for 2 hours. It was structured to look generous on the surface, a lump sum, continued use of the house for 18 months, a modest monthly support figure for Sophia. But buried in the language were clauses that would effectively restrict her professional activities in any industry adjacent to the Moretti Group's holdings for 5 years, which meant, functionally, most of the sectors she had trained for. And the house, on close reading, was not being transferred to her. She would occupy it on a lease arrangement until it was sold. The number for Sophia's monthly support was insultingly low. The number for Nia's was lower. What there was no number for, anywhere in the document, the 12 years. The career opportunities she'd declined, the moves she'd made for his schedule, the way she'd learned to take up less space so he could take up more. None of that had a line item, because to Lucian, none of that had been sacrifice. It had been the normal operation of a wife, a function, not a loss. Nia read the settlement offer twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept utility bills, and she went upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel, for exactly 15 minutes, every ugly, unmanageable thing she'd been holding back for weeks. Then she washed her face, and she started making calls. Evelyn Mercer had been her mother's attorney for 19 years. She was in her late 60s now, a small, precise-looking woman with scarperies, with silver locks, and the kind of eyes that seemed to be reading something behind whatever they were looking at. She had come to Celestine's funeral in a dark gray suit and had held Nia's hand at the graveside with saying anything, which was exactly right. Nia had not spoken with Evelyn in over a year. The call she made now, from the parking lot of Sophia's school, while she waited for dismissal, was one she should have made sooner. "I need to know something," Nia said, after the initial formalities, "about my mother's investments, specifically the ones she made in the early 2000s. There was a pause on the line, not a long pause, not a hesitant pause. Just a pause that told Nia that Evelyn Mercers already knew exactly why she was calling. "I've been wondering," Evelyn said carefully, "when you were going to ask me that." Nia felt something shift in her chest. Not quite relief. Something colder and more electrical than relief. "Tell me," Nia said. "Not over the phone," Evelyn said. "Come see me." And Nia a breath. "Bring everything you've kept. Everything you've documented. Don't leave the house without a copy of any record that could disappear." Nia stared through her windshield at the school entrance. The afternoon light was turning the gold brick, building the color of old honey. "How serious is this?" she asked. Another pause. "Your mother loved you," Evelyn said. "She made sure of that, in more ways than one." The dismissal bell rang. Nia watched Sophia appear in the doorway. Mr. Penny tucked under one arm, backpack pulling at her small shoulders, scanning the pickup lane for her mother's car. When she found it, her face did the thing it always did, opened up like a window. Pure, simple, uncomplicated relief. Nia waved. She kept her voice steady. She kept her face composed. She was still holding the phone to her ear. "I'll be there tomorrow," she told Evelyn. "First thing." She ended the call, unlocked the doors, and watched her daughter run toward her. In 12 years of marriage, Lucian Moretti had made one significant miscalculation. He had underestimated what a woman does with her silence. He thought it meant she had nothing to say. He was about to learn it meant she had been saving it. Evelyn Mercer's office was not what Nia had expected. She had imagined something formal, something that matched the woman's precision, clean lines, minimal clutter, the kind of space that communicated authority through restraint. What she found instead was a room that had clearly been lived in for decades. File boxes stacked in organized towers along one wall, a desk buried under folders, yellow legal pads, and 3 different coffee mugs in various states of abandonment. A row of framed photographs near the window, faces Nia didn't recognize, moments from a life that had nothing to do with law. It was the office of someone who had stopped performing professionalism a long time ago and just did the work. Evelyn was already seated when Nia arrived, and she didn't stand up to greet her. She simply gestured at the chair across the desk with her reading glasses, which she was holding like a pointer. "Sit down," she said, "and tell me what he offered you." Nia sat. She pulled the folded settlement offer from her bag and set it on the desk. Evelyn picked it up, unfolded it, and read it the way surgeons look at X-rays, not emotionally, not dramatically, just with focused, clinical attention. Her expression didn't change. When she finished, she set it down, straightened it against the deck's edge, and looked at Nia. "He thinks you're scared," Evelyn said. "He's partly right," Nia said. "Good. Scared and stupid are different things. He's counting on you being both." Evelyn leaned back. "You're not stupid. That's why your mother told me what she told me." Nia had been holding a cup of coffee she'd bought on the drive over. She realized she'd been gripping it without drinking it. She set it down. "Tell me about the shares." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Not a dramatic pause, more like someone choosing the right door in a hallway full of them. "Your mother came to me in 2003, Evelyn said. "Celestine was sharp, you know that. Sharp and careful and never impressed by flash. She had saved for 20 years. Money from her accounting work, from her rental property, from just living small when she didn't have to. And she wanted to invest it somewhere real. A breath. Lucian Moretti was building what would become the Moretti Group at that time. It wasn't the empire it is now. It was a real estate and logistics operation, with ambitions and a cash problem. He was looking for private investors, quiet investors, people who wanted return without visibility. Nia felt the room narrow slightly. "My mother invested in Lucian's company. Before you two ever met," Evelyn said, 2 years before. "She put in $400,000, everything she'd saved, plus the equity she pulled from the rental property for an ownership stake that was agreed, in a private contract I drafted myself, to represent a permanent equity position in any future holding structure Lucian formed." Nia stared at her. "She never told me. She told me not to tell you unless you needed to know." Evelyn's voice was level. "And when you married him, she decided you didn't. She said," and I'm quoting her exactly, because I wrote it down, If Nia ever needs a way out, I want her to have one that he can't take. The sound of the city came through the window, muffled and indifferent. A truck, a horn, something ordinary happening outside, while the floor shifted under Nia's feet. $400,000 in 2003, Nia said slowly. What does that look like now? Evelyn opened the folder in front of her and turned it so Nia could see the top page. It was a valuation summary, dated 3 weeks ago. Evelyn had commissioned it herself, apparently, in anticipation of exactly this conversation. Nia looked at the number. She looked at it for a long time. 18.7%, Evelyn said quietly, of the Moretti Group's legitimate corporate holdings. Not the shadow operations, the legal entity, the publicly traceable one. A pause. The one his board of directors actually governs. He never registered those shares, Nia said. Her voice had gone somewhere very quiet. He didn't, which was either a strategic choice or a very arrogant one, and I suspect it was both. Evelyn folded her hands on the desk. He thought your mother would either forget, die without documentation, or be too small and too quiet to ever enforce it. He thought he could just absorb her investment and reclassify it as a personal loan repaid in the early 2000s. He even has paperwork for that. But I have the original contract. Notarized, witnessed, filed with the state at the time of execution. And I have every piece of correspondence between your mother and Lucian's original attorney, a man named DeFazio, who is no longer with us, and who, as it turns out, kept extraordinarily detailed records. Nia sat with that for a moment. She thought about her mother shelling peas in that kitchen. She thought about Celestine looking at Lucian across a dinner table with that particular expression she'd always attributed to maternal wariness, protective, watchful, slightly cold. She had thought her mother simply didn't like the man. It was more than that. Her mother had known exactly who Lucian was, had known it before Nia did, had documented it and preserved it, and quietly built a trapdoor into the floor of his empire. All of it for Nia. He's going to fight this, Nia said. Of course he is. He has people, not just attorneys. He has resources that don't show up in court filings. Evelyn looked at her without flinching. I know what kind of man he is. Your mother knew too. That's why the original contract was filed with the state rather than held privately, and why I've kept authenticated copies in 3 separate secure locations for the past 22 years. A small, dry pause. I'm an old woman, Nia, but I have been an attorney for a very long time. I know how men like Lucian make problems disappear. I also know that the best protection against that is documentation that's already too public to erase. Nia looked down at her hands. Her left hand, specifically, where the ring wasn't anymore. The skin there looked slightly different, lighter, maybe, or just unfamiliar. What do I do first? She asked. First, Evelyn said, you go home and you pull together everything you've documented over 12 years of being in that household, every financial record you've photographed, every communication you've saved, every contract, every transfer, every anything with a number attached to it. She leaned forward. You said on the phone you'd been keeping records. For about 6 years, Nia said. I didn't know exactly why. I felt like I should. Evelyn looked at her with something that was almost but not quite. A smile. Your mother's daughter, she said. The night Nia came home with Evelyn's folder tucked under her coat, Lucian called. He didn't call often anymore. They had both settled into a pattern of communication through the attorneys, but something had apparently shifted in the 24 hours since she'd gone to see Evelyn, and she didn't know what that meant yet. She almost didn't pick up. You went to see Evelyn Mercer, he said. No greeting, no preamble. Nia stood in her kitchen with the folder on the counter in front of her. She was my mother's attorney. She's a retired woman with a grudge and a filing cabinet full of 30-year-old paperwork. Don't let her fill your head with things that aren't going to help you. His voice was doing the thing it did when he wanted to sound reasonable while delivering a warning. Smooth on top, something harder underneath. She's also a licensed attorney in active standing, Nia said. I checked. A silence. Nia. The smoothness dropped slightly. I want you to think about what you're doing. It's not for me. For Sophia. You want a custody battle? You want her in the middle of a legal fight that's going to drag on for 2 years? I want what Sophia deserves, Nia said, which is more than what your attorneys put in that settlement. The settlement is fair. The settlement is designed to leave me with nothing and you with everything. It has a non-compete clause that covers half the business sectors in this city. That's a standard protection. For your interests, she said. Another silence, longer this time. When Lucian spoke again, his voice had changed. The smooth layer was gone. You need to be very careful, he said, about who you're taking advice from and what road you're walking down. Because once you start down a road like this, I can't protect you from where it goes. It wasn't a threat, technically. That was the thing about Lucian. He had never, in 12 years, said anything that could be directly, cleanly classified as a threat. He was too careful for that, too practiced in the language of implication. The road he was describing was always vague enough to mean anything, and specific enough to make your skin tighten. I don't need your protection, Nia said. She ended the call. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed this with a kind of distant surprise. They had been shaking the night in the penthouse. They had been shaking the day the settlement arrived. But tonight they were very still, and she stood in the kitchen and looked at the folder on the counter and felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like herself. The pressure started small, the way it always does. 10 days after the call, Nia's volunteer position with the nonprofit board was quietly and apologetically terminated. The director, a nervous man named Pollard, who had always been friendly to her at events, sent a carefully worded email about budget restructuring and reduced board size. He did not make eye contact at the end of the email. He did not use her name. He just explained that her position had been eliminated and thanked her for her contributions. She knew. She didn't have proof. Not then, but she knew. The week after that, a woman she'd known for 8 years, a friend, who had attended her wedding, who she'd had dinner with regularly, for most of her marriage canceled 3 consecutive lunch plans without real explanation and then stopped responding to messages. Nia sat with her phone and looked at the silence on the screen and understood, in the way you understand something you've been quietly dreading, that Lucian had reached out, that he had said something, or implied something, or simply made it clear, through the social architecture of his influence, that proximity to Nia Caldwell had a price attached to it. He wasn't threatening her. He was just making her smaller, pulling resources back, removing warmth, demonstrating quietly and systematically that his name was the oxygen in every room she'd ever comfortably occupied. He expected her to feel it and break. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because he had never once paid the kind of attention that would have told him, was that Nia Caldwell had been quietly, methodically, building a different kind of record for the past 6 years. It had started without a clear plan. She had simply noticed, somewhere around year 6 of their marriage, that the way Lucian ran his household mirrored the way he ran his business with a confidence that no one would ever check his work. He moved money through accounts she was nominally attached to, but practically excluded from. He paid vendors she'd never heard of. He signed contracts that crossed her desk by accident, a misfiled document here, an email forwarded by mistake there, and what she saw in those accidental glimpses didn't always match what she heard him describe in other conversations. She wasn't an accountant, but her mother had been, and Nia had grown up at the knee of a woman who looked at numbers, the way other people looked at faces, as things that told stories, as things that could lie. So she had started keeping copies. Not dramatically, not with any specific plan for how she'd use them. Just photographing things on her phone, printing duplicates when she had access to the home. Printer saving emails to a personal account Lucian didn't know existed. 6 years of small, unglamorous accumulation. Financial records, vendor contracts, internal communications that had passed through shared accounts, transfers to holding companies with names that didn't resolve to anything obvious when you searched them. She hadn't known what she had. She was about to find out. The forensic accountant Evelyn brought in was a small, rumpled man named Garrett, who wore the same cardigan to every meeting and communicated primarily in the language of mild, continuous concern. He was, Evelyn told her, one of the best in the state. He had testified in 4 federal cases. He had the kind of low-key demeanor that juries and boards trusted completely, because he had the air of someone who found fraud personally offensive, like a grammatical error in a formal document. He came to Evelyn's office with a hard drive and a very large coffee, and he sat across from Nia and spent 40 minutes going through what she'd brought him. At the end of 40 minutes, he looked up. "How much of this does your husband know you have?" he asked. "None of it," Nia said. He nodded slowly, not excited but alert, the way a very good chess player looks when the board opens unexpectedly. "Can I ask, why did you start keeping these?" Nia thought about it honestly. because I grew up with a woman who said numbers don't lie. And some of these numbers weren't adding up. Garrett looked back down at the records. No, he said quietly. They're not. He tapped one printout with a pen. This transfer here, this is going to a holding company registered in Delaware. I'll need to run the full chain, but the name matches a pattern I've seen before. And this vendor contract, he set another page beside it. The counterpart address is the same zip code as a property registered to Lucian's brother-in-law. Nia felt something in her chest that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite fear, but lived somewhere between them. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Garrett said, carefully, that if the rest of this material is consistent, you may be looking at a very significant pattern of internal financial misconduct, undisclosed conflicts of interest, possible self-dealing, fences run through the corporate structure for what appear to be personal or family benefit. He looked at her directly. This isn't divorce leverage. This is corporate governance territory. Can it be proven? That's what I'm going to find out. He picked up his coffee. But Mrs. Moretti, and I don't say this lightly, if even 60% of what I'm seeing holds up, your husband has a very serious problem. Caldwell, she said. He blinked. I'm sorry? My name, she said. It's Caldwell. It's always been Caldwell. Lucian found out about the forensic accountant on a Tuesday. Nia didn't know how his information networks had never been fully visible to her, but his attorney called Evelyn's office that afternoon, and by evening Lucian himself was at the house. He didn't knock. He still had a key, technically. They hadn't addressed that specific detail yet. Nia was in the kitchen when she heard the front door open. Sophia was asleep upstairs. It was past 9 o'clock. She turned from the counter where she'd been reviewing Garrett's preliminary notes, and she did not panic, because she had learned something in the past few weeks about what she was made of. Lucian walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw what was on the counter. She didn't try to cover it. There was no point. He looked at the pages. Then he looked at her. His face was doing something she'd never seen it do before. Kind of working like machinery under pressure. Not anger yet. Not fully. Something that was trying to decide what form it wanted to take. What are you doing? He said. Having someone look at records, Nia said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. Later. Financial records from our household accounts. Those are proprietary documents. From accounts I'm a signatory on, she said. Accounts I have legal access to. You have no idea what you're touching. He took a step toward her. Not aggressive exactly, but large. Taking up space. Nia, you have no idea what you're getting into. This isn't a game. I know it's not, she said. I've known that for a while. These documents, he stopped himself. His jaw moved. He was doing the calculation. She could see him doing it, trying to assess how much she actually understood versus how much she was bluffing. You need to stop. Right now. Whatever attorney is telling you, this is a path forward, they are wrong. This is going to blow back on you. In what way? In ways you can't recover from. You keep telling me things I can't recover from, she said. And yet, here I am. The silence in the kitchen was very loud. Lucian looked at her for a long time. He looked at her with the particular expression that she now understood had always been an expression of inventory, cataloging her, assessing her, calculating her weight as an asset or a liability. He had looked at her that way the night she'd set her ring on his desk, and she'd missed it then. She didn't miss it now. You want to go to war, he said finally, almost soft. With me. I want what belongs to me, she said, and what belonged to my mother. The words landed in the room. She watched his face change, watched the calculation stop, watched something else take over, something that had no name for it except recognition. The specific, cold recognition of a man who has just understood, for the first time, what the actual problem is. Evelyn Mercer, he said. Barely a sound. She kept very good records, Nia said. He stood in her kitchen, the kitchen of the house he'd bought. In the marriage, he'd run like a subsidiary. And for the first time in 12 years, Lucian Moretti didn't know what his next move was. He left without saying anything else, which told Nia more than anything he could have said. The next morning, she received a call from her bank. Her personal account, not the household joint account, but the individual account she'd maintained quietly throughout the marriage, the one where she kept her own small savings, had been flagged for a routine review. Customer service representative was apologetic and slightly confused. There was nothing wrong, technically, just a review. Shouldn't take more than a few business days. Nia thanked the representative and ended the call and immediately called Evelyn. Trying to freeze my access, she said. I know, Evelyn said. She didn't sound surprised. His attorney has also filed a motion claiming the documents of you provided to your financial consultant were obtained improperly. They're going to try to have them suppressed. Can they do that? They can try, Evelyn said. They won't succeed, but they can slow us down. That's the point. He wants to run out your resources and your patience before we can get the shared documentation in front of the board. A pause. He's also done something else. Nia sat down. Tell me. He's filed a lawsuit against you, personally, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of confidential business materials, and tortious interference with corporate operations. Evelyn's voice was measured. Clinical. It's designed to disqualify you legally from any claim to the shareholding and to drain whatever finances you still have access to through legal defense costs. The room was very quiet. He planned this, Nia said. He's been planning since the morning after you put your ring down, Evelyn said. This is what men like Lucian do when they're cornered. They don't fight fair. They fight expensive. A breath. But Nia listened to me carefully. He made a mistake. What mistake? He filed that lawsuit this morning. Another pause. We were already scheduled to present the share documentation to the Moretti Group's independent board members this Thursday. His lawsuit, because of the specific claims it makes, actually accelerates the board's obligation to convene an emergency session. His own legal strategy has triggered the exact process he was trying to prevent. Nia heard this. She turned it over. He doesn't know that yet, she said. No, Evelyn said. He thinks he's just bought himself time. A sound that was almost a dry laugh. Your mother always said the most dangerous thing you can do to an arrogant man is let him believe he's winning. Thursday came with the specific, indifferent brightness of an autumn morning that doesn't care what's about to happen to anyone. Nia dressed carefully, not in the way she used to dress for Lucian's events, the careful, curated version of herself she'd learned to present at his functions, elegant and contained, and wholly secondary to his presence. She dressed for herself, dark blazer, the good one she'd bought before Sophia was born, clean lines. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman she recognized from a long time ago, someone who had been buried gradually, incrementally, under 12 years of becoming someone's wife. Evelyn had arranged for Garrett's preliminary audit findings to be delivered to the 3 independent board members 24 hours in advance. Not the full report that would take weeks more, but a summary document. Enough. The morning of the board meeting, Lucian's attorney called Evelyn with an offer. A revised settlement. Significantly better numbers. The non-compete language removed. An increased figure for Sophia's support. Nia was in the car when Evelyn relayed it. She was 12 minutes from the building. He knows, Nia said. He suspects, Evelyn said. He still doesn't know exactly what we have or how much the board has seen. He's trying to close this before the meeting. What do you think I should do? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I think she said that you should walk into that building. Nia looked through the windshield at the Moretti Group tower, rising ahead of her. 43 floors of glass and power, and a name she had never taken and never would. She thought about her mother shelling peas. She thought about Sophia's face opening like a window. She thought about a ring sitting on the corner of a mahogany desk. Tell them we'll see them at the meeting, she said. She pulled into the parking structure. She rode the elevator up, and when the doors opened on the 43rd floor, the same hallway, the same carpet under the same dimmed lights, where she had walked toward a door that was partly open, and a life that was already over, Nia Caldwell walked toward the boardroom, with Evelyn Mercer at her side and 12 years of documentation in a briefcase that had belonged to her mother. The door to the boardroom was fully open. Lucian was already inside. He saw her the moment she crossed the threshold. His face did the thing it had done in the kitchen, that working pressurized motion behind the surface. His attorney was beside him, whispering something. 2 of his senior executives sat along the table, both of whom Nia recognized from years of company events, both of whom were now looking at her with expressions she couldn't fully read. The 3 independent board members sat at the far end of the table. They had the summary document open in front of them. Lucian stood up. This meeting, he said, addressing the board, is not the appropriate venue for a personal dispute. Mr. Moretti, said the board's senior independent member, a woman named Hargrove, white-haired and stone-faced, please sit down. He didn't sit. Lucian, Hargrove again. Her voice had the specific texture of someone who had handled men like Lucian before and found them tedious. Sit. Down he sat. Evelyn set the certified documentation on the table. Share agreement, original contract, state filing records. 22 years of authenticated paperwork. The room was very quiet. Then Hargrove looked up from the documents at Nia and said, "Mrs. Miss Caldwell," Nia said. Hargrove held her eyes for a moment. "Miss Caldwell, are you prepared to present your position to this board?" Lucian's head turned toward Nia with the slow, coiled precision of something that has just realized it is not in the position it believed it occupied. Nia set her briefcase on the table. "Yes," she said, "I am." And the door swung shut behind her, with a sound like the closing of something that could not be reopened. The room had the particular silence of people who understood that something irreversible had just begun. Nia set the first document on the table without rushing. She had practiced this, not the words, so much as the pace, the refusal to hurry, the deliberate steadiness, that Evelyn had told her was more powerful than any argument she could make. "Let the documents do the talking," Evelyn had said. "Your job is to stay calm while he loses his." Hargrove and the two other independent board members, a heavy-set man named Drummond and a younger woman named Cho, who wore her hair in a severe bun and had said nothing since Nia walked in, each had a copy of Garrett's summary in front of them. They had read it the night before. Nia could tell by the way their eyes moved to specific pages as she spoke, confirming rather than discovering. She laid out the shared documentation first. The original contract between Celestine Caldwell and the Moretti Group's predecessor entity. State filing records. The authenticated correspondence between her mother and the late attorney Davazio. She didn't editorialize. She simply placed each document and named what it was. Lucian's attorney, a man named Carver, who had the compressed, deliberate manner of someone trained to make ugly things sound technical, interrupted twice. The first time to question the chain of custody on the Davazio correspondence. The second time to argue that the original investment agreement had been superseded by subsequent restructuring of the corporate entity. Hargrove let him finish both times. Then she looked at Evelyn. Evelyn addressed both objections in 4 sentences. The chain of custody was documented through a state notary archive. The restructuring argument failed because the original contract contained explicit language drafted by Davazio, who had apparently been a more careful attorney than Lucian had ever given him credit for, that bound any successor entity formed from the original holding structure. Carver started a third objection. "Mr. Carver," Hargrove said, without looking up from the document in front of her, "I'll tell you when I need you." He stopped. Lucian, who had been sitting with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set, looked at Carver the way people look at something that has just failed them in public. Then he looked back at Nia. She did not look away. She met his eyes and held them and said nothing, because she didn't need to say anything. Drummond, the heavy-set board member, leaned forward. "Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying the particular gravity of a man who had spent decades in rooms where serious was discussed. "Are you asserting that these shares were deliberately withheld from the corporate registry?" "I'm asserting that they were never registered, despite a binding contractual obligation to do so," Nia said. "Whether that omission was deliberate is a question I'll leave to the board's investigation." She felt Lucian stiffen across the table. She didn't look at him. Cho, the younger board member, who had been silent, spoke for the first time. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was flat and precise. "Were you aware of this investment agreement at the time of the corporate restructuring in 2007? Question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Lucian's attorney started to speak. "I'm asking Mr. Moretti," Cho said. She didn't raise her voice. She just aimed the words. Lucian looked at Cho. Something moved behind his eyes. "I was aware," he said carefully, "that Celestine Caldwell had made an early contribution to the venture. The nature of that contribution and its legal classification was a matter that was reviewed by counsels at the time of restructuring and determined to be—" "There's no record of that review," Evelyn said, not loudly, just factually. "We've requested the relevant documentation from the restructuring file through your corporate records office. It doesn't exist." Another silence. Drummond and Cho exchanged a glance. It was brief, professional, almost invisible. Nia caught it anyway. Hargrove set down the document she'd been holding and looked at Lucian directly. "Mr. Moretti, I think we need to move to this a second matter." She turned a page. The audit summary. Garrett had not attended the meeting. That had been a strategic decision, Evelyn's. "If he's there, Carver will spend the whole session attacking the messenger," she'd said. Let the number speak without a face attached. The number spoke clearly enough. The summary document was 17 pages. Garrett had been meticulous in ways that felt almost punishing, every figure cross-referenced, every anomalous transaction flagged and contextualized, every pattern identified and labeled with the specific corporate governance standard it appeared to violate. The pattern that had begun with the Delaware holding company threaded through 6 years of financial records. Vendor contracts routed through entities connected to Lucian's relatives. Corporate expense classifications that didn't survive scrutiny, personal, travel, real estate maintenance on properties not owned by the company, construction work at a location that matched the address of Lucian's lake house, a consulting fee of $420,000 paid to a company that, when traced through 2 layers of shell registration, resolved to a name Nia recognized. It was Bianca Vale's brother. She had not known that part. Garrett had found it. When Hargrove read that page aloud, not dramatically, just as a matter of record, Nia felt the air in the room change texture. She heard, from Lucian's side of the table, a very small sound. Not quite a sharp breath, not quite a word, something controlled too late. Carver leaned toward Lucian and whispered something. Lucian shook his head once, a small, tight motion that meant stop talking. Cho had her pen in her hand and was making notes. Drummond had his fingers pressed against his mouth. Hargrove finished the page and set it down and looked at the table for a moment before she looked up. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "I'm going to ask you to step out of this room with your counsel while the board confers." "Absolutely not," Lucian said. "This is my company." "This is a publicly held corporation with a board of directors," Hargrove said. "And at this moment, you are the subject of a governance review. You'll step out, or I'll have the meeting adjourned and reconvened with legal counsel present for the board's protection, at which point the preliminary findings will need to be filed with the appropriate regulatory bodies as a matter of standard procedure." She held his gaze. "Your choice, Lucian. Make it in the next 30 seconds. 27 seconds passed. Lucian stood up. He straightened his jacket with both hands. He looked at Nia one time, just once, and the look had no readable bottom to it. It was like looking into something that went down further than you could see, and then he walked to the door with Carver at his shoulder. The door closed. The room exhaled. What happened in the next 40 minutes, Nia would replay many times in the weeks and months that followed. The board members conferred. Evelyn sat beside Nia and was very still. Nia drank water from a glass someone had placed in front of her and was grateful for the specific task of holding it. Drummond asked questions about the shared documentation. Cho asked questions about the audit trail. Hargrove asked almost nothing, which Nia had come to understand was how Hargrove operated. She absorbed information like a system running a process, as you didn't see the output until it was ready. At one point, Cho looked up from the audit summary and said, "Ms. Caldwell, how long have you been gathering this documentation?" "About 6 years, Nia said. "Were you advised by counsel during that time?" "No," Nia said. "I just kept things, because something felt wrong." Cho looked at her for a moment. Not warmly, exactly, she wasn't a warm woman, but with something attentive in it. "All right," she said, and went back to her notes. After 40 minutes, Hargrove said, "Miss Caldwell, Miss Mercer, could you give us a few minutes?" Nia and Evelyn stepped into the hallway. Lucian and Carver were at the far end, near the elevator bank. Lucian had his back to the room, his phone to his ear. Posture had a quality Nia had never seen in it before. Not slumped, not broken, but compressed. Like something under load, he ended his call. He turned. They looked at each other across 50 feet of corridor. Carver said something to him. He didn't respond to it. After a moment, Lucian walked toward her. Carver followed, and then stopped, when Lucian's pace made clear he wasn't including him. He stopped 6 feet away. His voice came out low, stripped of its usual register, flatter than she'd ever heard it. "I'm going to offer you a full and fair settlement," he said. "Real numbers. Whatever Mercer tells you is correct on the shares. We'll recognize it. The lawsuit is withdrawn. Full custody arrangement negotiated by the attorneys. No games." He paused. "But you stop this today. You take the documents off the table, and we settle this privately." Nia looked at him. She thought about the almost smile. The night in the penthouse. 2 years, he'd said. 2 years, like the number meant nothing. "You should have thought about that 12 years ago, she said quietly. "Or 6. Or even that night in your office." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that for the rest of her life. You had so many moments to be different, Lucian. You just never believed you had to be. He looked at her. Something moved through his face, something she didn't have a name for, something complicated and maybe, in a different universe, even genuine. But it was too late for genuine. The boardroom door opened. Hargrove appeared. "We're ready," she said. The board's immediate decisions were four. First, the shared documentation was accepted as valid and binding pending formal legal verification, which the board's independent counsel would complete within 30 days. Second, the audit findings were sufficient to trigger a mandatory governance review under the corporation's own bylaws. Third, Lucian was formally suspended from executive authority, pending the outcome of that review. Fourth, an interim leadership structure would be appointed to maintain operations. Carver objected to all four. Hargrove noted his objections for the record and moved on. Lucian didn't object out loud. He sat in his chair at the head of the table. The chair he had occupied with the absolute certainty of a man who believed some things simply could not be taken, and he did not speak. That was the part that stayed with Nia longest. Not his anger, which she'd feared. Not a threat, which she'd expected. Just the silence of a man confronting something his arrogance had never built a contingency for. The meeting adjourned. People began gathering their things. Carver was on his phone immediately. Two of Lucian's senior executives filed out without speaking to anyone. Hargrove approached Nia as she was closing her briefcase. She extended her hand. Nia shook it. "The interim chairmanship requires board ratification," Hargrove said, her voice low and direct. "That process will take several weeks. But I want you to understand the direction this is going." She held Nia's hand a moment longer than a standard handshake. "Your mother was a careful woman." "She was," Nia said. Hargrove released her hand and left. Nia stood in the emptying room and let out a breath that had been building since the elevator ride up. And that should have been the end of Act 3. That was what she'd thought, walking out of the boardroom and into the hallway and into the elevator. She had thought, the hardest part is done. She had thought, Evelyn was right. The documentation held, the board responded the way Evelyn predicted, and now it is a legal and administrative process. She had forgotten, in the relief of the moment, who she was dealing with. The call came at 11:47 that night. Sophia had been asleep for 2 hours. Nia was at the kitchen table with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, going through Garrett's fuller notes when her phone lit up. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She almost let it voicemail the way she'd buried it, the way she'd learned to handle unknown numbers since the divorce proceedings began. Something made her pick up. "Ms. Caldwell." The voice was male, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't immediately place, somewhere in the range of Eastern European, but smoothed out, like something that had been spoken over many years in many countries. "My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm someone who has worked adjacent to your husband's operations for a long time, and I'm calling because what happened today in that boardroom is going to change the shape of certain things very quickly." Nia stood up from the kitchen table. She walked to the window. The city was doing what it always did, at midnight glittering and indifferent. "What do you want?" she said. "I don't want anything," the voice said. "I'm offering information. What you do with it is your concern." A pause. "The audit your consultant has assembled, it's accurate as far as it goes. But there are things it doesn't reach, because they weren't in any of the household records you preserved." Her hand tightened on the phone. "What things?" she said. "There are accounts," the voice said. "Not in the Moretti Group structure. Not in any entity your consultant would have been able to trace from the documents you had. Separate architecture, much older, predating the corporate entity by years." Another pause. "Miss Caldwell, the $400,000 your mother invested in 2003 was not the beginning of a real estate and logistics venture." The window was cold against her fingers, where she'd pressed them to the glass without realizing it. "What was it?" she said. "Seed capital," the voice said. "For something that was never intended to be legitimate." Nia's mouth went dry. "Are you telling me?" she said carefully. "That my mother invested in?" She didn't know. The voice said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. Celestine Caldwell was shown a legitimate prospectus for a legitimate operation. What she couldn't have known was that the legitimate operation was from the beginning, designed to provide cover for something else. The real estate holdings, the logistics contracts, they were always partially structural. A framework. She turned away from the window. She needed to move, but didn't know where to go in her own kitchen. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Because what you've started today, the board review, the audit, it's going to reach those accounts eventually. It might take months. It might take longer, but it's going to reach them. A breath on the line. And when it does, Miss Caldwell, the question won't be whether Lucian is exposed. He will be. The question will be whether your mother's investment, and by extension, your inheritance of that position, is interpreted as knowing participation in the underlying structure. The words landed one at a time, and she felt each one. That's not possible, she said. She didn't know. You know that, the voice said, and I know that. But there are people in certain federal agencies that have been watching Lucian's operations for a long time who are going to see a woman who invested $400,000 in 2003, received no documented return for years, and whose daughter then married the principal and stayed married to him for 12 years. A pause that was almost gentle. The optics of that narrative are not favorable. Nia sat down on the kitchen floor. She didn't decide to. Her legs just went. She sat on the cold tile and held the phone against her ear and looked at the leg of the kitchen table. "What do I do?" she said. The question came out very small. That, the voice said, is what you need to decide before the review goes any further. Because right now you are holding leverage over a man who has been patient enough to build an entire second architecture beneath the one you've exposed. And Lucian, whatever else he is not going to let that architecture be uncovered without first making sure that if he goes down, everyone in his orbit goes down with him. A final pause, including the daughter of the woman whose money helped build it. The line went dead. Nia sat on the kitchen floor for a very long time. The wine was still on the table above her. The city was still doing what it always did outside. Somewhere upstairs, Sophia was sleeping with Mr. Penny tucked under her arm, breathing the slow and even breath of a child who believed her mother had everything under control. Nia pressed the back of her head against the cabinet behind her. She had walked into that boardroom today, believing she understood the battlefield. She had believed she knew the shape of what Lucian had built, what he had hidden, what she could expose and what she could protect. She had been wrong. Not about the shares. Not about the audit. Those were real and they would hold. She had been wrong about the depth. She had looked at the surface of Lucian Moretti's empire and believed she was seeing the bottom. She had not been looking at the bottom. She was looking at a false floor. By 3 in the morning she had made a list. Not on her phone, on paper, in the yellow legal pad she kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists, and Sophia's school schedule. She wrote in the same small, controlled handwriting her mother had spent years correcting at the kitchen table in their old house. She wrote down what the voice had told her. She wrote down what it meant. She wrote down what it meant for her mother's legacy, for her own position, for Sophia. Then she wrote down one question at the bottom of the page, and she drew a line under it, and she looked at it for a long time. Question was, what do you do when the weapon you've built could destroy you along with the man you aimed it at? She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sitting on her kitchen floor at the morning with her back against the cabinet and the city glittering uselessly outside. She could not go backward. Backward meant Lucian's settlement, Lucian's terms, Lucian's version of what she was allowed to have. Backward meant a life arranged around a man who had lied to her about everything, including, apparently, the very foundation of the world she had agreed to live in. She would not go backward, which meant she had to find a way through a situation that had just revealed itself to be twice as dangerous as she had understood it to be, with resources that were half what she'd believed, against a man who had apparently spent 20 years building contingencies for exactly this kind of moment. She closed the legal pad. She stood up from the floor. She went to the cabinet, found the coffee, and started a pot at 3 in the morning, because sleep was not a thing that existed for her tonight. And she stood at the counter and thought about her mother shelling peas in that kitchen in their old house, calm and precise, and always 3 steps ahead of the problem she was watching approach from the far end of the road. Celestine had known what Lucian was. She had also left Nia a weapon she could hold, which meant Celestine had believed the weapon was usable, which meant her mother, who was the most careful person Nia had ever known, had looked at all of this and decided her daughter could survive it. Nia poured her coffee. She sat back down at the table. She opened Garrett's notes to the section on the Delaware Holding Company, and she picked up her pen and she began looking for the false floor her mother had already known was there, and had already, Nia was beginning to understand, already built a path. She found it at 4:47 in the morning. Not the full picture, not yet, but the edge of it. The thread that didn't belong. Garrett's notes on the Delaware Holding Company included a footnote, almost apologetic in its smallness, about a secondary registration in the same filing period. A sister entity formed 6 weeks after the first, with a nearly identical name, one word different. Holdings replaced with ventures that had been dissolved in 2009. Garrett had flagged it as likely irrelevant to the corporate audit trail and moved on. Nia stared at the footnote. Something her mother used to say came back to her, the way her mother's voice always came back to her. In the deep hours of the night, when something looks irrelevant, ask who decided it was irrelevant and why that decision was convenient for them. She wrote the name of the dissolved entity at the top of a clean page. Then she wrote the dissolution date, March 2009. She sat with that date for a moment. March 2009. Sophia had been born in January of that year. Nia had been in a newborn fog, surviving on fragments of sleep. Her entire world collapsed to the radius of a bassinet and a baby who had not yet decided whether she approved of the outside world. Lucian had been in and out, present in the way that powerful men are present with infants physically available and emotionally somewhere else, already solving the next problem, already running the next calculation. March 2009. A company dissolved 2 months after his daughter was born. She wrote the word "why" and underlined it 3 times. At 6 in the morning, she called Garrett. He answered on the 4th ring with the voice of a man who had not been asleep, which she noted without asking about. "I know why you're calling," he said. "I've been awake too." "The dissolved entity," she said. "I already pulled it." His voice had that alert, without excitement quality she'd come to rely on. The registered agent for both the active and the dissolved company is the same individual, a man named Voss, Carl Voss. He's a professional registered agent, runs a service that files paperwork for hundreds of entities, so his name appearing twice isn't automatically significant. "But," she said, "but Voss's service was used almost exclusively by 2 client networks during that period. One was a legitimate real estate consortium out of New Jersey. The other," he paused, and she could hear him choosing his words, "has a more complicated history. Several of the entities from that second network ended up in a federal racketeering filing in 2014. The case settled without going to trial. Sealed record." Nia pressed her palm flat against the kitchen table. Coffee in front of her had gone cold an hour ago. "Sealed," she said. "Sealed," he repeated, "which means the public record doesn't show which entities were involved or what the settlement required. But the fact that it was sealed rather than dismissed means someone paid to make it go away, or cooperated in exchange for it going away," Garrett said. "Those are different things, with very different implications." She looked at the yellow legal pad in front of her, at the question she'd written at the bottom of the page 6 hours ago. "What do you do when the weapon you've built could destroy you, along with the man you aimed it at?" "Garrett," she said, "I need you to find out which entities were in that filing." A silence, not long. "That's a sealed federal record, Ms. Caldwell. I can't access it through normal channels." "I'm not asking you to break a law," she said. "I'm asking you if there's another path." Another pause. The sound of him thinking, which was a very particular sound, quiet and slightly pressurized, like a door being tested before it's opened. "There might be someone," he said slowly. "An attorney I've worked with before. She handles cases that touch federal racketeering territory. The sealed record is relevant to an active proceeding." He stopped. "The board review qualifies as an active proceeding. In theory, a motion could be made for limited disclosure of relevant portions of the sealed record. It's a long shot. It takes time we might not have." "How long?" "Weeks, maybe longer." Nia looked at the window. The city was beginning its gray, pre-dawn brightening. Somewhere upstairs, Sophia would be awake in an hour. She would come downstairs with Mr. Penny and her hair in the particular state of morning chaos that made her look like a very small, very confident lion, and she would ask for cereal and then change her mind and ask for toast, and Nia would make the toast because she always made the toast, because some things just had to continue regardless of what the night had brought. "Start the motion," Nia said. "And Garrett, whatever you're charging for this, keep a record of every hour, every cost. We're going to need a complete accounting eventually." "Of everything?" he asked. "Of everything," she said. She ended the call and sat in her kitchen as the city got light. Evelyn arrived at 9. Nia had texted her at 6:30. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." Evelyn had responded, "I'll be there at 9. No questions. No back and forth. The woman operated at a frequency of pure forward motion that Nia found, in this particular stretch of her life, deeply stabilizing. She told Evelyn everything: the call, the voice, what he'd said about Celestine's investment, and the underlying structure and the federal interest in Lucian's operations. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She sat across the kitchen table with her hands folded and her eyes on Nia's face, and she listened, the way very experienced people listen, not building her response while you're still talking, but actually hearing, letting the information settle before she touched it. When Nia finished, Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did the voice sound like someone with direct knowledge or someone relaying information?" Nia thought about it. "Direct," she said. "It felt like someone who had been in the rooms." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That matters because relayed information can be manipulated in transit. This person had direct knowledge." She paused. "Then what he told you about the underlying structure is probably accurate. And if it's accurate, then yes, there's a risk to your position. Not a criminal risk. You have no culpability here, Nia, and any competent attorney can establish that. But a reputational and civil risk, in terms of how the shareholding is perceived in the context of an investigation." "He said Lucian would make sure I went down with him," Nia said. "Of course he would," Evelyn said. "That's not a threat. That's a tactic. Classic and predictable." She reached across the table and picked up the legal pad. She looked at the question Nia had written at the bottom. She read it without commenting on it. Then she set the pad down. "What you need to understand, Nia, is that the person who called you last night, whoever they are, is not a neutral party. They're either working against Lucian for their own reasons, or they're working for Lucian to frighten you back into settlement. Possibly both." "Possibly both," Nia repeated. "The information can be true and still be a weapon aimed at you," Evelyn said. "Both things are possible. What matters is what you do with it." Nia looked at her. "What do we do with it?" Evelyn looked back at her with those reading behind the surface eyes. "We go find out if it's true," she said, "before anyone else decides the narrative." The next 11 days were the most suspended of Nia's life. Suspended not in the sense of peace, but in the sense of a held breath, the particular tension of a situation where everything is in motion, and none of it has landed yet. Garrett pursued the sealed record through Evelyn's federal contact, a woman named Okafor, who communicated exclusively via encrypted email and whose responses arrived at unpredictable hours of the day and night with the terse efficiency of someone who billed by the minute and meant it. Lucian's suspension from executive authority had gone into effect, formally on the Monday following the board meeting. Carver had filed two motions challenging the board's authority to impose the suspension. Both were denied within 72 hours by the corporate governance framework's own arbitration mechanism, a detail that Hargrove had apparently anticipated because her own legal team had documentation ready before Carver's challenges were even filed. He was no longer allowed in the building. Nia had heard that piece of information from Evelyn in the same flat, factual tone that Evelyn used for all information, and she had sat with it for a moment and felt something that she would not call satisfaction, because satisfaction seemed too clean for what it was. It was more like the specific, complicated feeling of watching a consequence arrive, for something that had needed a consequence for a very long time. She did not enjoy it, but she did not pretend not to feel it. Lucian did not take the exclusion quietly. The calls started the 3rd day after the board meeting. Not to Nia directly. He'd stopped calling her directly after the night in her kitchen. Through intermediaries. Through his executive assistant, before Bianca, an older man named Trent, who had been with the company for 15 years, and who now called Evelyn's office approximately once a day with offers, revisions to offers, and thinly veiled suggestions that the board review was going to damage the company's value, and therefore Nia's shareholder position. Evelyn routed all of Trent's calls to voicemail and returned none of them. But the pressure had other faces. Sophia's school called on a Wednesday, politely informing Nia that the quarterly tuition payment had not been processed. Nia knew she had submitted it. She called her bank. The account review was apparently still ongoing. The funds were technically accessible, but flagged in a way that was creating processing delays. She paid the tuition from her personal savings. She didn't show any of this to Sophia. She made the toast. She drove the carpool. She kept her voice normal and her face the face of a woman who was managing. She was managing. But it was costing her something that didn't have a financial name. On day 9, Garrett called at noon. "I have something," he said. His voice had a quality she'd learned to read. He sounded the way he sounded when the thing he'd found was significant enough to slow him down. "Tell me," she said. "Okafor got a limited disclosure from the sealed record," he said. "Not the full thing, but enough. A breath." 2 of the entities in the 2014 federal racketeering filing are directly tied to the Delaware structure. Not the active holding company, the dissolved one. The sister entity, the one formed 6 weeks after. Nia stood very still in the middle of her living room. What does that mean? It means the dissolved entity was part of the structure under federal review. And when it was dissolved in 2009, 2 months after Sophia was born, the assets it held were transferred. Some to legitimate Moretti Group subsidiaries, but a significant portion went somewhere else. He paused. To a trust. What trust? It's named the Caldwell Family Trust, Garrett said. The room tilted slightly. Not actually, she knew. The room wasn't moving, but something behind her eyes did, a kind of lurching recalibration. "That's my name," she said. "Yes," Garrett said. "It is. I don't have a trust in my name." "You don't have a trust in your name that you know about," Garrett said carefully. Caldwell Family Trust was established in February 2009 with Lucian Moretti listed as the settlor and Nia. "You need to hear this." He paused again, and she understood he was choosing the words with precision. Celestine Caldwell listed as the sole named beneficiary, with a survivorship clause transferring all benefits to Celestine's surviving heir. The room did it again, that lurch. "He put my mother's name on it," Nia said. "He put her name on it," Garrett said. "And when Celestine died, I inherited it," Nia said. "Automatically," he said. "By operation of the trust's own terms." She sat down on her couch. She pressed her free hand flat against her knee because it was the most grounding surface available and she needed something real to press against. "How much is in it?" she asked. "The current traced value," Garrett said, "is approximately $11 million. But Nia, before you process that number, you need to understand what the trust contains. It's not clean money. The assets transferred into it in 2009 came from the dissolved entity that was part of the federal review. If those assets are characterized as proceeds from racketeering activity, then inheriting them makes me the beneficiary of criminal proceeds," she said. "Potentially," he said. "Yes." She stared at the far wall of her living room. There was a drawing Sophia had made, taped to the wall at child height, a picture of their house, pink with a yellow sun in the corner, both figures in the front yard holding hands. Taller figure had long hair. The smaller one had a rabbit under her arm. "He built a trap," Nia said. Her voice was very quiet. "He built a trust in my mother's name, using money from a criminal structure, knowing that when my mother died, it would transfer to me. Knowing that if he was ever investigated, if I ever turned against him, there would be a financial structure with my name, attached to criminal proceeds." Garrett said nothing for a moment. "It's sophisticated," he said, "and it was built a long time ago. Before you had any reason to look for it. Before Sophia was born," she said. "He built it before our daughter was 2 months old." She heard Garrett exhale. "Yeah," he said, and for the first time his voice had something in it other than the professional flatness he usually maintained. Something briefly, humanly appalled. She didn't say anything else for a moment. She looked at Sophia's drawing. "I need Evelyn," she said finally. "Right now. I'll send her everything I have in the next hour," Garrett said. "Thank you," she said. She ended the call. She sat on her couch in her living room, with Sophia's drawing on the wall across from her, and the city quiet outside and the full, terrible shape of what Lucian Moretti had built around her, finally, completely visible. He had not married a wife. He had married a vault, a place to put things he needed to hide, a name he could attach to financial structures that needed a layer of distance from his own. A woman whose existence in his life provided a paper trail that led, if anyone ever followed it far enough, to her instead of to him. 12 years. She had given him 12 years, and he had used every one of them. Evelyn arrived in 40 minutes. She read Garrett's materials in 20. When she looked up, her face had the expression of someone who had been in the law for a very long time and had still just seen something that surprised her. "He was careful," Evelyn said. "Can he do this to me?" Nia said. "Legally. Can he make this stick?" "He can try," Evelyn said. "The question is whether the trust's structure survives scrutiny." If the assets transferred into it are proven to be criminal proceeds, which requires the federal investigation to reach that conclusion, then yes, your position as beneficiary could be challenged. She paused. But there's something else here. Tell me. The trust names Celestine as beneficiary, not you directly. The survivorship clause is how you inherit. Evelyn was talking faster than her usual pace, which told Nia she was seeing something. Which means the trust was structured around your mother's relationship with Lucian. Which means if we can demonstrate that Celestine was an unknowing participant, that her name was used without her informed consent, then the trust's foundational validity is in question. Can we demonstrate that? Nia asked. She's gone, Evelyn said, which makes it harder. But she stopped. She looked at the folder in front of her. Nia, your mother came to me in 2003 to document her investment. Came back to me in 2009. Nia went still. February 2009? Evelyn met her eyes. March, she said. She came to me in March 2009, 1 month after the trust was formed. She paused. She came to me because she had received a document in the mail, a document she didn't recognize, naming her as the beneficiary of a trust she had no memory of agreeing to. She was confused and she was frightened, and she wanted to know what it meant. You never told me, Nia said. She asked me not to, Evelyn said. She stopped. For the first time since Nia had known her, Evelyn Mercer's voice did something unsteady. Just for a second. She thought if she made noise about it, Lucian would find a way to use it against you. She had just had Sophia. She said she didn't want to complicate your life. Another pause. She asked me to document it and keep it safe, which I did. The silence in the kitchen was very full. You have documentation of my mother's non-consent, Nia said. Her contemporaneous written statement, Evelyn said. March 2009, in which she states, in her own words, that she did not knowingly agree to be named as the beneficiary of any trust associated with Lucian Moretti, that she had not been informed of its existence prior to receiving the document, and that she did not understand the source of the assets it described. Nia pressed both hands over her mouth. She sat like that for a moment. Her mother had known. Not everything, but enough. Celestine had felt the shape of the trap and had done what she always did: documented it, preserved it, handed it to the person she trusted most to keep it safe. She had died without knowing whether Nia would ever need it. She had kept it anyway. Evelyn, Nia said. Her voice was barely there. My mother saved me again. Evelyn said nothing. She reached across the table and put her hand over Nia's, and they sat like that for a moment in the kitchen while the full weight of it settled. Then Evelyn straightened. She released Nia's hand. She picked up her pen. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. What they did required 3 days and 2 sleepless nights and a conference call with Okafor that lasted 4 hours and covered more federal procedural law than Nia had encountered in her entire life combined. Caldwell Family Trust was a problem. It was also, Okafor determined, potentially the most powerful piece of evidence in the entire case, because its existence and structure demonstrated, with documentary clarity, that Lucian had deliberately and systematically used the people around him as legal cover for financial structures connected to activity under federal review. Celestine's 2009 statement changed the shape of the trust from evidence against Nia to evidence against Lucian, but using it required making a decision that Nia turned over for a long time before she made it. Okafor's position was clear. The most protected path for Nia personally was to cooperate with the federal inquiry voluntarily, to bring Celestine's statement and Garrett's audit findings to the relevant agency before they arrived on her doorstep, to establish proactively and definitively that she was not a knowing participant in any of the structures Lucian had built. If you bring this to them, Okafor said on the phone, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who dealt in very high stakes regularly, and had stopped performing urgency about it, you control the narrative. If they come to you, which they will, eventually, because the board review is going to get to these documents, you're responding. Responding is harder. And if I cooperate, Nia said, what happens to the shareholding? Your legitimate shareholding, the corporate equity, documented in your mother's original 2003 investment agreement, is separate from the trust. They're different instruments. Cooperation on the trust issue doesn't compromise the shareholder position. A pause. But it does likely accelerate the investigations into Lucian's overall operations. Which means, Nia said. Which means, Okafor said, that the board review and the federal inquiry will run in parallel. The board will move to finalize governance decisions before the federal process concludes, because they have a fiduciary obligation to stabilize the company's operations. Question is whether Lucian has enough allies left on that board to block what's coming. He doesn't, Nia said. She said it with a certainty that surprised her as she heard it come out of her own mouth. Hargrove and Cho have seen the audit findings. Drummond is a numbers man, and the numbers don't lie. Senior executives who didn't walk out of that meeting, 2 of them came to Evelyn separately the day after. They wanted to know what protections were available to board members who cooperated with the review. A beat of silence on Okafor's end. They came to cooperate? Okafor said. Within 48 hours, Nia said. Another beat. Caldwell, Okafor said, and for a brief moment her voice had something in it, not warmth exactly, but a species of professional respect that Nia recognized from people who were very rarely surprised. Cooperating proactively would be the right move. I know, Nia said. Schedule the meeting. The meeting with the federal inquiry took place on a Thursday morning in an office building 4 blocks from the federal courthouse. Nia went with Evelyn and Okafor. She wore the same blazer she'd worn to the board meeting because it was the only piece of clothing she owned that felt like armor. She told them everything she knew, everything she'd documented, everything Garrett had found, Celestine's statement, the trust, the dissolved entity, the registered agent, the voice on the phone, described as completely as she could manage without a name to attach to it. She answered questions for 6 hours. At hour 3, one of the agents, a woman about Nia's age, who had been taking notes almost continuously since they began, looked up from her legal pad and said, "Miss Caldwell, how long have you known about the underlying structure of your husband's operations?" "I didn't know," Nia said. "I suspected that the financial records I'd been keeping didn't add up. I didn't know what I was looking at." "But you kept the records," the agent said. "For 6 years," Nia said. The agent looked at her for a moment. Why? Because Nia said, "I grew up with a woman who said numbers don't lie," and something felt wrong. The agent wrote something on her legal pad. She didn't share what. At hour 6, they were finished. Okafor had a brief conversation with the lead agent in the hallway, while Nia and Evelyn waited near the elevator. Nia watched through the glass wall, without being able to hear anything. The agent's expression was unreadable. Okafor's was, as always, professionally neutral. When Okafor came back, she said, "They have more than we do." She said it quietly. "They've been watching Lucian's operations since 2018. What we brought them today, a pause, significantly accelerates their timeline." "What does that mean for me?" Nia asked. "It means," Okafor said, "that you are no longer a person of interest. You are a cooperating witness with documented evidence of your non-participation, a breath. It means the trap Lucian built around you doesn't work anymore." Nia stood in the hallway of a federal building at 3 in the afternoon and breathed. Just breathed. One full, unrestricted breath after another. She called Garrett from the car. "It's done," she said. "How did it go?" he asked. "They have more than us," she said. "They've been watching for years." A silence. "How do you feel?" he asked. It was not the kind of question Garrett asked. It was so far outside his usual register that it caught her genuinely off guard. She almost laughed, almost, like I just diffused something, she said. "And I'm not entirely sure I have both my hands still." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Almost. For what it's worth," he said. "The preliminary audit I'm completing for the board, it's going to be definitive. Whatever the federal process does, the board review stands on its own." "When?" she said. "I present to Hargrove next Tuesday," he said. 6 days. 6 days, and then the board would have everything. The weekend before Tuesday was the strangest she could remember. Strange in the way of profound quiet after sustained noise, the kind of silence that your nervous system doesn't immediately know how to trust. She made meals. She helped Sophia with a school project about oceans. She sat on the back porch on Saturday afternoon and watched the light change and did not think for almost 20 minutes about any of it. Sophia came out and climbed into her lap, which she did less often now at 6 than she had at 4, and she smelled like the lavender soap from her bath. And Mr. Penny tucked against her ribs. "Mama," Sophia said. "Yeah, baby. Is everything okay?" Nia pulled her closer. "Getting there," she said. "Getting there." Sophia seemed to consider this. She accepted it the way children accept truth, not because it's complete, but because the person saying it sounds like they mean it. Monday night, Lucian called Nia directly for the first time in weeks. She picked up. She didn't know why, exactly. Something about the timing. "I know what you did," he said. His voice was stripped entirely now. No smoothness, no calculation, just the bare thing underneath it all, which turned out to sound like a man who had just understood the actual size of his problem for the first time. "Then you know it's over," she said. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. "I didn't start it," she said. "You did, 20 years ago, maybe longer. I just stopped letting you finish it." A silence that had real weight to it. "Company," he started. "The company will be fine," she said. "Better, actually. Once the people who've been protecting your accounting have to answer for it." "Nihaya," his voice broke on the word, not dramatically. Just briefly, like a surface giving way under pressure. Her voice was not unkind. That surprised her. She had expected to feel in this moment some form of fury. What she felt instead was something older and more final. "Don't apologize to me tonight. It's too late for that, and we both know it." Another silence. "Sophia," he said. "Sophia is mine," Nia said. "She was always mine. You can be her father. She deserves that. Whatever you are to me, but you will do it. On terms that protect her, not you. That's what the custody agreement is going to say. And you're going to sign it." He didn't answer. "Lucian," she said, "you're going to sign it." A very long silence. "Yeah," he said finally. It was barely a word. She ended the call. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at her hands and thought about the woman she'd been the night she'd ridden the elevator up to the 43rd floor with a stuffed rabbit in her bag. That woman had not known what she was walking toward. This woman knew exactly where she was going. Tuesday morning arrived with low clouds and the smell of rain and Nia driving toward the Moretti Group tower for what would later turn out to be the last time she made that drive, with anything less than the legal authority to be exactly where she was going. Garrett presented the full audit findings to Hargrove, Drummond, and Cho at 9 in the morning. Mafia was not in that meeting. She waited in a conference room, 2 floors down with Evelyn and a terrible cup of coffee from the building's lobby cafe. At 11:40, Hargrove's assistant appeared at the conference room door. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "the board is ready for you." Evelyn squeezed her arm once. Nia set down the terrible coffee. She stood up. She straightened the blazer. And she walked toward the elevator with the particular stride of a woman who had spent 12 years learning what it felt like to shrink and had decided, somewhere in the space of the worst weeks of her life, that she was done with that particular lesson. The elevator opened on 43. The boardroom door was open. Hargrove stood when Nia walked in. Drummond stood. Cho, who Nia had never seen make an unnecessary gesture, stood. Garrett was at the far end of the table, still in his cardigan, with the expression of a man who has just watched a very long equation resolve correctly. The audit report sat in the center of the table, 47 pages. Every anomaly documented, every pattern named, every figure cross-referenced to its source and its destination, and every place it went in between. Hargrove looked at Nia across the length of the table. "We've reviewed the complete findings," she said. "The board's position is unanimous." She paused. "Mr. Moretti's suspension will be converted to a permanent removal from executive authority pending the outcome of the investigation. The board is prepared to move immediately on the question of interim leadership." Another pause, the kind that has weight in it. "Miss Caldwell, we'd like to discuss your appointment as interim chairwoman of the Moretti Group." The room was completely silent. Nia stood at the threshold of the boardroom that bore the name of the man who had spent 12 years telling her she was nothing without it. She looked at Hargrove. She looked at the table. She looked at the chair at the head of it, the chair that Lucian had occupied like a throne, like a birthright, like a thing that could only ever belong to one kind of person. She walked to it. She put her hands on the back of it. She pulled it out, and she sat down in it the way you sit, in something that was always supposed to be yours, not triumphantly, not performatively, but with the quiet, grounded certainty of someone who's finally arrived somewhere after a very... She sat in that chair, and the room was so quiet. She could hear the ventilation system running somewhere above the ceiling tiles. Not the quiet of emptiness. The quiet of people who understood that they had just witnessed something shift, not dramatically, not with the noise that power usually makes when it changes hands, but with the particular, irreversible silences of a door, closing on one era and opening onto another. Hargrove sat down first, then Drummond, then Cho. Garrett stayed at the end of the table with his cardigan and his folders and his expression of a man who had done his job and done it well, and was satisfied, in the way of careful people, by the specific and unglamorous fact of accuracy. Evelyn sat in the chair along the wall, not at the table, because this part was not her moment, and she had always known the difference between those two things. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on Nia, and if you knew her well enough to read the small adjustments of her face, you would have seen something in it that Nia Caldwell would have recognized immediately. Pride, old and deep and hard-won. Hargrove opened the folder in front of her. "The motion for interim appointment requires a formal vote," she said. Board members present Hargrove, Drummond Cho. "The motion is to appoint Nia Caldwell as interim chairwoman of the Moretti Group, effective immediately, pending the conclusion of the corporate governance review and the formal verification of the shareholding documentation." She looked at Drummond. He said aye. She looked at Cho. "Aye," Cho said, without looking up from the page she was reading. Hargrove looked back at Nia. "Aye," she said. "Motion carries." She closed the folder. "Congratulations, Miss Caldwell. There is a great deal of work ahead of you." "I know," Nia said. And she did. She knew it in the most unglamorous, untriumphant way possible, not as a victory speech, not as a moment of arrival, but as the first clear view of an enormous amount of difficult and necessary labor. The company's legitimate operations had been running under a governance structure that had been compromised for years. There were employees who didn't know what their leadership had been doing. There were vendors and partners and subsidiary managers who needed to understand what was changing and what was not. There was so much that was not going to be clean or simple or satisfying. Nia sat in that chair at the head of that table and looked at the faces of the people across from her and felt, underneath everything, one clean and absolute thing: she was not afraid. She had been afraid of Lucian's shadow for 12 years. She had woken up this morning, and it was gone. Not because he was gone, he wasn't, not yet, not fully, but because she now understood what the shadow had actually been made of. Not power, not invulnerability, just the deliberate and sustained effort to make her believe she had nowhere to stand without him. She had places to stand. She was standing in one right now. The news of Lucian's permanent removal from executive authority reached him, Nia was told later, through Carver, who had the privilege of delivering information that made even practiced attorneys uncomfortable. Carver called Evelyn's office that same afternoon not to challenge, not to file a motion, but to ask, with the particular deflation of someone who has just seen a long game end badly, whether there was any mechanism by which his client might address the board directly. Evelyn told him there was not at this time, and recommended that his client focus his energies on the separate legal proceedings that were, as of that week, officially underway. Carver said he would relay that. He did not sound like a man who was looking forward to the conversation. Lucian's actual response came 2 days later, and it did not come through attorneys. Nia was in her first full day of operational work at the company, sitting across from the CFO, a man named Hessler, who had the haggard look of someone who had been carrying a weight he hadn't chosen to carry, and who had apparently been one of the two executives to approach Evelyn after the board meeting when her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number she recognized from the cadence of the text as Lucian. "I need to see you. Not attorneys, not the board. You and me. One conversation." She showed it to no one. She finished her meeting with Hessler, who was more useful and more honest than she'd expected, and who seemed to experience the specific relief of a man who has been waiting to tell the truth about something for a very long time and has finally been given permission. That evening she texted back, Thursday. "The coffee place on Clement, noon." He responded immediately, "Okay," she told Evelyn. Evelyn said, "Do you want me there?" "No," Nia said. Pause. "Be careful." "I know him," Nia said. And then, after a moment, "That's the part he never counted on. I know him better than anyone alive, and he spent 12 years assuming that was a disadvantage for me." Thursday was cold in the particular way of late autumn, when the city has stopped pretending summer's coming back. She arrived at the coffee place on Clement 10 minutes early, ordered something she didn't really want, and found a table in the back corner where she could see the door. Lucian walked in at noon exactly. He was wearing a coat she'd never seen gray wool, the kind of thing you buy when you've stopped thinking about what impression you're making and just want to be warm. He looked different, not broken, Exactly, men like Lucian didn't break quickly, or simply the way ordinary things broke, but worn. Like something that had been running at high pressure for a very long time and had finally been allowed to decompress. He saw her. He came to the table. He sat down without ordering anything, which was unusual. Lucian had always moved through public spaces with the ease of a man who felt at home in them. Today he moved like someone who was aware of being watched. He probably was being watched. She had considered that. She had made her peace with it. He looked at her across the small table. "You did it," he said. "We both know you gave me every tool I needed," she said. He looked down at the table for a moment. His hands were in front of him, both flat on the surface, and she noticed that his wedding ring was gone. She didn't know when he'd taken it off. She didn't know why she noticed. "The federal thing," he said. "What about it? How much did you give them?" "Everything I had," she said. His jaw moved. Not anger, or if it was anger, it was the old, exhausted kind that had been burning too long. "You know what that means for me?" "Yes," she said. "I do. You did it anyway. What you built hurt people, Lucian." She kept her voice level. "Not just me. Not just my mother. There are people attached to those structures who have been living in the shadow of something they didn't fully understand. Some of them have been cleaning up after choices you made before they knew who you were." She paused. "You don't get to build a machine that runs on other people's exposure and then ask me to protect it because we were married." He looked at her for a long time. "I wasn't going to ask you to protect it," he said. "I know it's too late for that." "Then what did you want to say?" He was quiet for a moment, not performing the quiet, just in it. His eyes moved away from her face and across the room and came back. "I didn't marry you to use you," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever the structures looked like, whatever my attorneys built the decision to marry you, wasn't that." Nia looked at him. She believed him, which was the complicated part. She believed that somewhere in Lucian Moretti there was a version of the story where he had loved her in whatever capacity he was capable of, and that the way he had treated her, the control, the compartmentalization, the eventual betrayal had been the result not of calculated cruelty, but of a man who had built his entire architecture of living on the premise that he could have everything and protect nothing. Believing that didn't change anything. But it was true, and she had made a decision some time ago to stay honest about things that were true even when they were inconvenient. "I believe you," she said, "and it doesn't matter." He looked at her. "It doesn't matter that I loved you?" "It matters that you didn't know how," she said. "Those are different things." He sat with that. The coffee place moved around them, a barista calling out a name, a chair scraping, the ordinary percussion of a public space that had no idea what was happening at the corner table in the back. "Sophia," he said. "Sophia's fine," Nia said. "She's going to be fine. She's better than either of us deserve." She paused. "You can be her father, Lucian. She needs that. But you have to be honest with her, not now, not all at once, not in ways that damage her. But as she gets older, no more architecture, no more structures she doesn't know about." I think you do it without meaning to," she said. "Because that's who you are. You build things around the people you love without asking them if they want to be enclosed." She held his eyes. "Don't do it to her." His jaw worked. He looked away. When he looked back, something in his expression had a rawness to it that she had not seen from him before, not in 12 years. Not in the worst of the board proceedings. Not even in the parking lot of his building, on the night everything started. "I don't know how to be different," he said. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. "That's your work to do," she said. "Not mine." The custody agreement was finalized 3 weeks later. It was not the brutal, contested, 2-year legal war that Lucian had implied it would become in those early weeks when he'd believed fear would bring her home. The agreement that emerged after Carver and Evelyn went through 12 drafts. After Nia spent 3 evenings reading language line by line until her eyes burned, was one that protected Sophia's stability, ensured consistent and meaningful access for Lucian, and contained provisions that she had insisted on and that Carver had initially resisted and eventually accepted. No significant decision affecting Sophia's life education, medical relocation, could be made without mutual consent. No new partner of either parent could be introduced to Sophia without a 60-day notification period. Financial support was indexed to the company's performance in a way that protected Sophia from any downturns in Lucian's circumstances during the investigation. And one clause that Nia had written herself, in handwriting, on a yellow legal pad, and handed to Evelyn to translate into legal language, In all matters pertaining to the child's development, both parties agree that Sophia's understanding of her own worth and capability shall not be limited, conditioned, or diminished by either parent's beliefs about what she can or cannot become. Carver had read that clause and been quiet for a moment. Then he had initialed it without comment. Lucian signed the agreement on a Tuesday morning. He signed it in Carver's office, which Nia did not attend. Evelyn sent her a text when it was done. 2 words. It's done. Nia was at the company when the text arrived. She was in a meeting with 3 department heads who had been running their divisions in a kind of suspended organizational anxiety since Lucian's removal, not knowing what came next, not knowing who was in charge of what, not knowing whether to make decisions or wait. She was in the process of telling them, clearly and specifically, that the uncertainty was ending and the work was beginning. She read the text. She put her phone face down on the table. She continued the meeting. Later, alone in the office that had been set up for her on the 38th floor, she had declined to take Lucian's office on 43. For reasons that she didn't feel the need to explain to anyone, she sat for a moment and let herself feel the specific completion of it. Not joy, not triumph, something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a structure that has been under extraordinary load finally being allowed to settle into its proper form. She thought about the night she'd driven home in the rain. She thought about the stuffed rabbit with one eye and a ribbon that had started the whole thing. She thought about standing in a hallway, outside a partly open door, and knowing, before she could see anything, that something was wrong. She thought about her mother's hands shelling peas. She sat in her office for 8 minutes and let all of it be real. The loss of it, the cost of it, the specific and unbeautiful price of walking through something like this and coming out the other side not unscathed but intact. Then she picked up her phone and called Sophia's school to confirm the pickup arrangement for the afternoon. The federal investigation became public knowledge 6 weeks after Nia's meeting with the agents through a press release from the relevant agency that was careful and measured and said almost nothing while implying everything. It named the Moretti Group's corporate entity. It named Lucian. It did not name Nia. The press picked it up immediately. For 48 hours, Nia's phone received more calls than she had capacity to process. Journalists, former associates, people she hadn't spoken to in years, who somehow had her number and a sudden interest in her situation. She answered none of them personally. Evelyn's office issued a single statement, 4 sentences, that confirmed Nia's role as interim chairwoman, confirmed her full cooperation with relevant authorities, and declined to comment on any matters which relating to the ongoing investigation. Statement was clean. Evelyn had written it in under 20 minutes. It said exactly what needed to be said and nothing else. Lucian's response to the public announcement came through Carver another formal statement, also careful, that expressed cooperation and noted his intention to address all matters through appropriate legal channels. It was the statement of a man who had attorneys telling him what to say and the specific discipline to follow their advice. Nia read both statements the same morning, in the kitchen before Sophia woke up, with coffee that was actually hot this time. She thought about the woman who had received that first settlement offer and sat at this same table and read it for 2 hours, feeling the shape of what was being taken from her. She thought about all the things that looked like they were being taken that turned out to be something else entirely. Bianca Vale left the city in the month following the investigation becoming public. Nia heard this not from anyone who told her directly, but from Hessler, who mentioned it in passing during one of their operational meetings. Bianca had submitted a formal resignation, cited personal reasons, provided 4 weeks' notice that she did not serve out, and was reported to have relocated to another state. Hessler relayed this information in the flat, informational tone of a man who understood it was relevant context without being sure of its emotional weight, and Nia received it in the same register. She thought about Bianca Vale exactly once more after that, standing in Lucian's penthouse office with his hand on her face, looking at Nia across the room with the expression of someone who had just realized the nature of the position she was in. Not triumphant, not cruel, just caught. She was 31, and she had made choices, and so had Nia, and so had Lucian, and the consequences had been distributed in ways that were not entirely fair or entirely unfair, which was how consequences usually worked. Nia didn't hate her. She had tried to in the early weeks, because hate would have been simpler than the complicated truth. The complicated truth was that Bianca had been, in her own way, another person arranged around Lucian's center of gravity, another orbit in his solar system of control. She hoped she found something better. She never said this out loud to anyone. Some things you keep. The formal governance review concluded 4 months after the board meeting. Garrett's complete audit finding, combined with the federal investigation's parallel work and the cooperation of 2 senior executives who had been quietly miserable for years, produced a picture of the Moretti Group's financial architecture that was thorough and, in places, astonishing in its complexity. Lucian had built with real craft, not the craft of a builder, but the craft of someone who understood that the best hiding places were the ones that looked, on the surface, like exactly what they were supposed to be. The Corporate Governance Board's final report ran to 211 pages. Nia read all of it, not because she was required to, but because she believed you couldn't lead something you hadn't looked at clearly, even when the looking was uncomfortable. Some of what she found was worse than she'd known. Some of it was, strangely, better evidence that the legitimate operations of the company had been run with genuine competence by people who had no involvement in the shadow structures, who had simply been doing their jobs inside an organization that had a very different set of pores at the top. Those people were still there. They were, in many cases, relieved in the particular way of people who have been holding their breath for a long time and have been given permission to exhale. She thought about what it meant to lead an organization full of people who had learned not to ask questions, because asking questions had been dangerous. She thought about it for a long time. On her second full month as interim chairwoman, she convened a company-wide town hall, not in the tower, but in a rented event space 3 blocks away, a deliberate choice to get everyone out of the building that had been Lucian's domain. Every department, every level. The people who processed invoices, and the people who managed contracts, and the people who had been hired 6 months ago and had no history with any of it. She stood at the front of the room without a podium because she didn't want the podium. She said, "Some of you have been working here for a long time, and you've known that something wasn't right, and you didn't know what to do about it. I want you to know that I understand that. I don't expect any of you to have been heroes in a situation where heroism was punished. What I'm asking now is for something different. I'm asking for honesty. I'm asking for the kind of culture where you can say when something is wrong and have it heard. Cannot promise you easy, but I can promise you that every decision I make here will be made in daylight." The room was very quiet when she finished. A woman in the 4th row, an accounts administrator, who had been with the company for 9 years, whose name Nia had made a point of learning, in her first week started clapping. Not dramatically, just firmly. The way you clap when you mean it. Others joined. Nia stood at the front of the room and felt it wash over her and kept her face composed. Because she was not going to cry in front of 240 employees, and also because the moment didn't call for tears. It called for the specific, unglamorous, forward-facing posture of someone who understood that this moment was not the end of anything. It was, in the most literal sense, the beginning of a great deal of hard work. The board voted unanimously to make her permanent chairwoman 6 months after her interim appointment. The vote happened on a Wednesday afternoon in January. Outside the window of the boardroom, the city was doing its winter thing, gray and dense, and carrying the particular smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Hargrove called the vote. All 3 ayes came in the same quiet, businesslike tone that the board brought to everything, which Nia had come to appreciate. These were people who didn't perform seriousness. They just were serious, and they did the work. After the meeting, Hargrove walked with her to the elevator. "Your mother would have been pleased," she said. It was the first personal thing she had ever said to Nia. Nia looked at her. "Did you know her?" she asked. "I knew of her," Hargrove said. "In the early 2000s, when Lucian was building, there were people in the investment community who talked about the early backers. Your mother's name was mentioned a few times. People noted that she was sharp, a brief pause, and that she had made a significant bet on something that nobody else believed in yet. She believed in the wrong thing," Nia said. "She believed in the right thing in the wrong container," Hargrove said. "That's different." The elevator arrived. She stepped in. "Keep the legitimate operations legitimate," she said as the doors began to close. "That's all. The rest will follow." The doors closed. Nia stood in the hallway of the 43rd floor. The same carpet, the same hallway, where A different version of her had walked toward a partly open door, and she stood there for a moment in the silence. But then she turned and walked back toward her work. Lucian's legal proceedings moved the way these things move, not quickly, not cleanly, with the grinding institutional patience of a process that doesn't accommodate the timeline of the people inside it. He entered into a cooperation agreement with the federal inquiry that required his attorneys 6 months to negotiate. Terms were sealed. What emerged publicly was partial and carefully managed. He would not go to prison, that much became clear. As the negotiation progressed, the cooperation having been valuable enough to alter the calculus. He would face substantial financial penalties, a permanent bar from executive roles in any publicly held company, and a civil consent order that required ongoing monitoring of his financial activities. He was not going to be destroyed. He was going to be diminished, significantly, permanently, in ways that could not be undone. For a man who had spent his entire adult life building and protecting a specific kind of power, Nia thought, that was probably the appropriate price. She heard the news of the cooperation agreement through Evelyn on a Thursday evening while she was helping Sophia with homework at the kitchen table. She nodded once, asked a few clarifying questions, ended the call. "Who was that?" Sophia asked. She was 7 now, and her interest in adult phone conversations had increased in direct proportion to her awareness that they sometimes involved things that mattered. "Evelyn," Nia said. "Business, is everything okay?" Nia looked at her daughter. 7 years old, and already asking that question like someone who's interested that the honest answer was sometimes complicated. "Yeah," she said. "Everything is okay." Sophia accepted this and went back to her math worksheet, which involved subtraction in a way that Sophia found personally offensive. Nia picked up her pencil and helped her work through it, problem by problem, at the kitchen table under the warm light of the ordinary evening. Lucian saw Sophia on alternating weekends, per the custody agreement. The handoffs happened at a neutral location, a coffee place, not unlike the one on Clement, chosen because it was public, and because Sophia liked their hot chocolate, and because the normalcy of it helped make the arrangement feel, to a 7-year-old, like a regular part of life rather than an artifact of catastrophe. The first few handoffs were awkward, in the way of things that are new and necessary and haven't found their rhythm yet. Lucian was careful with her. Sophia, who was 7 and perceptive, and had processed the changes in her family with the resilience of a child who has been loved securely enough to survive disruption, was careful with him in return, in the way children are careful with a parent they're not entirely sure of, which is to say, she was simultaneously watchful and ready to love him if he gave her a reason to. He gave her reasons, not perfectly, not without the occasional stiffness of a man who had never been good at unstructured time, who had always occupied himself with the work of management and had less practice with the work of simply being present. But he showed up. He remembered things she cared about. He asked questions about her life and listened to the answers. Nia watched this from the required distance of the handoff arrangement and felt something she had not anticipated, a complicated, reluctant relief. Not for herself. For Sophia, her daughter deserved a father who was trying. Whatever else Lucian had been or done, when it came to Sophia, he was trying. She didn't tell him that. Some things you keep. Evelyn retired the following spring. She didn't announce it dramatically. She sent Nia a letter, an actual letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, the kind of communication that had become rare enough to feel intentional. It said that she had completed the work she'd set out to do, that her office would be winding down, and that the files relating to Celestine Caldwell's estate and investment documentation would be transferred to Nia's personal custody, where they belonged. At the bottom, in her small, precise handwriting, she had written, "Your mother asked me, in our last conversation before she passed, whether I thought you would be all right. I told her yes, I was correct." Nia read the letter at her desk at the company. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to be able to find. Called Evelyn that evening. "You could have told me earlier," she said, "about the 2009 statement, about all of it." "I know," Evelyn said. "I spent years not knowing what my mother had built for me." "Yes," Evelyn said. "And you also spent years building something for yourself without knowing she had. Which means you know, and she would have wanted you to know that what you did wasn't because of what she left you. It was because of who you are. Nia was quiet for a moment. That's very like something she would have said, she said. I've known her since 1984, Evelyn said. Some of it was bound to rub off. They talked for another hour not about business, not about legal matters, but about Celestine, about who she had been, about the peas and the kitchen, and the way she'd had of looking at you when she thought you were capable of more than you were currently doing, about the specific, irreplaceable quality of being known by someone who has been watching you your whole life, and has decided, without sentimentality, that you are worth the watching. When they finally said goodbye, Nia sat in her kitchen for a while, with the phone on the table in front of her. Outside, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings did, softening everything slightly, taking the hard edges off the light, making the city look, briefly, like a place that could be kind. She thought about a lot of things in that quiet. She thought about the weight of 12 years, and what it had cost her and what, unexpectedly, and without her permission, it had also built in her a comprehension of her own capacity that she could not have arrived at any other way, which was the most frustrating kind of knowledge, the kind that comes packaged in exactly the experience you would not have chosen. She thought about the first morning after the night in the penthouse, when she had washed her face and started making calls. How small that had felt, how insufficient, how she had not known, standing at that bathroom mirror, that she was beginning something. She thought about her mother shelling peas. She thought about Sophia's drawing on the wall still there. She hadn't taken it down. She wasn't going to take it down the pink house with the yellow sun and the two figures holding hands in the front yard. On a Saturday in April, Nia took Sophia to the cemetery. They had been before on Celestine's birthday, on the anniversary of her death, on the irregular schedule of grief that doesn't follow a calendar so much as it all follows a feeling. But this visit had a different quality to it. Sophia was 7 and old enough to understand something about where they were and who they were visiting, and she walked beside Nia through the cemetery paths with a seriousness that sat on her small face like something borrowed from a slightly older version of herself. They brought flowers yellow, because Celestine had preferred yellow, and set them in the holder at the base of the headstone, which read Celestine Marie Caldwell, and the dates of a life that had been, by any measure, well lived. Sophia looked at the headstone for a moment. Smart, Sophia said. It wasn't a question. Very, Nia said. Like you? Nia looked at her daughter. Like both of us, she said. Like all three of us, actually. Sophia considered this with the grave consideration of a 7-year-old encountering an idea she wanted to verify. How do you know? She asked. Because she told me, Nia said. Not in those words, but she showed me. She paused. Spent her whole life making sure I would be okay, even if she wasn't there to help me. That's not something you do for someone you think is going to be helpless. Sophia looked at the headstone a moment longer. Then she reached over and took Nia's hand, not seeking comfort, just contact, the simple and uncomplicated connection of a child who loves someone and isn't self-conscious about it yet. They stood like that for a while in the April light. Nia looked at her mother's name in stone and thought, I found the path you built. I found it, and I walked past it, and I kept going. She thought, I wish you'd seen it. She thought, I think you knew anyway. She didn't say any of this out loud. Some conversations don't need words. She was back at her desk on Monday morning by 7:30. There was a board agenda to prepare, a meeting with the legal team about the ongoing settlement of several subsidiary contracts that had been tied to the compromised structures, and a call scheduled with 2 prospective board candidates, people whose backgrounds in corporate governance and financial accountability were exactly what the company needed going forward, people who had never had any connection to the way it had been run before. She made coffee in the small kitchen adjacent to her office, not Lucian's office, which had been converted into a conference room because she had not wanted it and had been clear about that from the beginning. Her office on 38 was smaller and had a window that looked east rather than down, and on clear days, she could see past the tower cluster to where the city opened up toward the water, and she found this, in a way she didn't overthink, better. She sat at her desk with her coffee, and the agenda, and the particular focused quiet of a Monday morning before the day fully started. Her phone showed a text from Sophia, sent from her tablet at home with the babysitter, a photograph of Mr. Penny propped against a cereal box, positioned in front of a small arrangement of breakfast foods as though the rabbit was hosting a brunch. The caption read, In Sophia's recently mastered but still idiosyncratic spelling, he is having breakfast. Nia looked at the photograph for a long moment. She typed back, "Tell him I said good morning." 3 seconds later, a photograph of Mr. Penny facing the camera, one embroidered eye regarding the lens, with the specific dignity of a one-eyed stuffed rabbit who has been through a great deal and has opinions about it. Nia set her phone down. She was smiling. She did not particularly try to stop. She picked up the board agenda. She began to work. Months later, the number didn't matter. The specific count wasn't the point. A profile of the Moretti Group's restructuring appeared in a business publication. It was a careful piece, more interested in governance and organizational culture than in drama, and it spent most of its length on the operational changes and the new board composition and the recovery of the company's legitimate operations. Near the end, almost in passing, it noted that the company's new permanent chairwoman had been, until recently, the wife of the man whose mismanagement had nearly destroyed it. It characterized her path to the chairmanship as unexpected. It used the word unlikely. Nia read the piece in her office. She got to the word unlikely, and she stopped. She sat with it for a moment. Then she thought about who she had been when she walked into a partly open door on a rainy night with a stuffed rabbit in her bag, expecting nothing except to go home. She thought about 12 years of arranged smallness, of learning to take up less space, of being told in 1,000 ways that were too subtle to name that she was fortunate to occupy the life she'd been permitted. She thought about sitting on her kitchen floor at 3 a.m. with a cold tile under her and a phone that had just delivered the worst possible news, and her daughter asleep upstairs with the specific, trusting density of a child who believed her mother had it under control. She thought about making coffee at 3 a.m. because there was nothing else to do but keep going. Unlikely. She picked up her pen and made a note in the margin of the agenda she'd been working through. A note about the quarterly reporting structure that she wanted to revisit before the next board meeting. Then she set the publication aside and went back to work. The city moved outside her window. The morning light did what morning light does, shifted and brightened, and fell through glass onto the surface of a desk, where a woman was doing the ordinary, unglamorous, completely necessaries of building something that would last. She wasn't thinking about Lucian. She wasn't thinking about the rainy night, or the partly open door, or the almost smile that had followed her home. She was thinking about the work. She was thinking about Sophia's brunch rabbit. She was thinking about yellow flowers in a cemetery in April light. She was thinking, somewhere underneath all of it, in the place where the truest things live, without needing to be said, about a woman in a kitchen, shelling peas, with steady hands and watching the road, and knowing, long before anyone else did, exactly what was coming, and preparing for it anyway, and leaving everything she knew in the hands of the person she trusted, Chimtis, her daughter, who had, it turned out, been worth every bit of it.